Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Katsubai, I think your fellow nominees owe you a debt of gratitude because many Biden nominees have been extreme, but your record is so far out of the mainstream that you have attracted virtually all of the questions. I was particularly intrigued by your statement to Senator Blackburn that you said you are not, in fact, a Marxist. And then you said, and I wrote it down, I have not praised Marxist ideas. Now, as you know, in law, there is the fact of evidence. And so let's go to something you wrote, an article that is entitled Centralized Property Theory, in which you wrote, it begins, it's on the front page of your law school newspaper, you write, quote, intimate knowing, the lovers kissed, familiar and ever exciting, passionate transcendence, beyond the physical exhilaration lies a burning light in our limbs, our hearts, floating, flying, falling in every direction, amorphous and wonderful, time-stretching, space-curving, exquisitely explosive eros, and yet I timidly tremble every time. Now, somehow this is about property, which is not immediately evident as to why, but later in the article you write, you say, property is not simply a relationship between an owner and an object of ownership. Property is primarily a complex relationship between people and secondarily regards the objects people exploit. Historically, three paradigms have dominated European notions of property. Locke appealed to the notion that labor points to who has the right to exploit property. Bentham relied on utility to dictate who has rights based on how the property is exploited. And Marx was plainly disgusted with the alienation that property imposed and its establishment of an us and them and haves and have-not. Each theory alone denies important components of human experience. Among them are the ability to work, the need for personal privacy and boundaries, and uniquely diverse desires which spin us all in differing life directions. However, the process towards integrating all three may provide a framework for relationships that enhances each unique self. The aspiration towards intimate knowing, the intimate knowing of oneself and others, is a creative struggle towards redefining property. What the hell does that mean?
Senator, when I was preparing and reviewing my materials for this hearing and for the process, I also have to admit that that writing was far from clear or articulate, and the poetry was definitely not good. Now, Senator, I don't make...
Do you believe we need to have a creative struggle towards redefining property, which is what you were advocating for?
That was something that I wrote 30 years ago, Senator, and in the course of just exploring law school and the ideas that came with...
Okay, so your flirtations with Marxism were 30 years ago, so let's go more recent. In 2020, you gave a speech entitled Reflections on Equity and Privilege, and you said, quote, first, the world is wide enough for all of us. Privilege derives its power from the belief in scarcity, scarcity of money, natural resources, food, and power itself. The desire to control it all drives privilege. I want to suggest to you that equity, the idea of equity, rejects this model of scarcity. Now, that's Marxism in 2020. What did that mean?
I've never considered that to be Marxist, Senator. It's the idea that equal access, and in the context of the work that I do here... So
there is no scarcity, there are no property rights. Equity gives everyone an entitlement to each other's property. Is that right?
Not at all. And in the context of the work that I do on the bench, Senator, when you look at my record for all of these 16 years, you will find that I have upheld the Constitution and our case precedent.
Okay, well, let's turn to something else you wrote in the Wisconsin Women Law Journal. Again, this is your writing. The name of the article is Destabilizing Power and Rape, Why Consent Theory and Rape Law Has Turned on Its Head. You cited Professor Catherine McKinnon, who argued, quote, sexuality itself is a power web in which heterosexual relations per se are infused with violence and control, and, quote, most intercourse is rape. Now, her views are extreme, and yet And when Senator Blackburn asks you about them, here at the hearing, when you want to be confirmed, you try to distance yourself from them. But here's what you wrote in the article. You embrace those views. You wrote, quote, I employ the view that rape is sex in order to focus on the significance of consent in rape law. The Sex Act is a violation per se without consent. In order to properly align the consent doctrine in rape law with consent in other areas of law, non-consent must be presumed. Do you believe that is a mainstream view, that heterosexual sex is rape?
Senator, in that article, I was exploring different ideas and theories, and I was employing the hypothetical that you've just described to try to tease out a particular issue with respect to consent. With respect to your last question...
So you also quoted Professor McKinnon, who wrote, quote, sexuality is to feminism what work is to Marxism. Let me ask you again, what does that mean?
Senator, I was summarizing different theories that people were presenting so that way I could explain them and then employ an analysis with respect to the issue of what consent was in the context of sexual assault back in 30 years ago.
I think your views are far.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. March 2020, on the steps of the Supreme Court, Senator Schumer said, quote, I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you. April of last year, the Democrat chairman of the House Judiciary Committee introduced legislation to add 4 associate justices to the United States Supreme Court, to pack the court. May 2nd of this year, the draft opinion of the Dobbs decision was made public. The next day, May 3rd, the very next day, attacks on churches, crisis pregnancy centers begin. They occur around the country and they continue for months. Over 100 churches, crisis pregnancy centers attacked since the leak of that opinion. Now, you know what they call all that? You know what all that's called? Intimidation. Threats against Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, threats to pack the court, leaking of an opinion, and attacks on churches, a concerted effort by the left to intimidate the highest court in our land. And I didn't even mention the lies told about Justice Kavanaugh in 2018 during his confirmation process. I didn't mention when Senator Joe Biden and Senate Democrats drove Justice Alito's wife to tears during his confirmation hearing. And I didn't mention the Democrats on this committee who have for the last year attacked Justice Thomas and his wife. And now today, a hearing about 8-year-old secondhand hearsay. 8-year-old secondhand hearsay from a witness who for 18 years took money from pro-life donors, $30 million, and then this year, all of a sudden remembers, just weeks after the Dobbs leak happened, that 8 years ago, he heard that at a dinner party, Justice Alito told his guests that they would like the Hobby Lobby decision. Just now remembers that. Mr. Schenck wasn't there. Justice Alito said Mr. Schenk's story is not true. The dinner guest said Mr. Schenk's story is not true. The Supreme Court said Mr. Schenk's story is not true. Politico said, quote, we spent several months, attempting to corroborate Schenk's claim, but were unable to locate anyone who heard about the decision from Alito or his wife before its release. Let me just say that part of that again. We were unable to locate anyone who heard about the decision from Alito before its release. And even the New York Times who broke the story, they said there are gaps in Mr. Schenk's account. Gaps in his account. That's liberal speak for this story doesn't add up. But I'll tell you something that did happen. The Dobbs draft opinion was in fact leaked, and it was made public on May 2nd, 2022. And after that leak, as I've said, dozens and dozens of churches were attacked. Dozens and dozens of pro-life crisis pregnancy centers were attacked. Protests occurred at Supreme Court justices' homes, and there was an assassination attempt on Justice Kavanaugh. But to date, in this Congress, not one hearing in the House Judiciary Committee about that leak. Not one hearing about the real leak, but here we are today at the end of the session having a hearing on the fake leak. From a witness whose story even the liberal press says, quote, we were unable to locate anyone who can corroborate what he said. That's what we're doing. So I hope maybe in the last week or two of this session of Congress, maybe we can begin to look into what happened with the Dobbs decision, how that leak took place. I think that would be something that would merit our time and attention. I would also point out this, Mr. Chairman, before I yield back. We just got his testimony. We're supposed to get his testimony the night before. We just, at 12:20, we get his testimony for a 10 o'clock hearing. Been nice if we'd had that as well. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the chair of the Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property and the Internet, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for his opening statement.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chairman.
I yield back. I now recognize the ranking member for her 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Taibbi, the emails and documents you've produced all date to around 2020. Is that correct?
No, there's a significant portion of them from 2017 and 2018 as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Schellenberger, what dates do you have?
I believe that we had emails including 2022, 2021, 2020.
That's also true.
2019.
And Mr. Taibbi said 2018. Do you have 2018 as well?
I can't remember.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Taibbi, how many employees did Twitter employ in approximately the time period of 2020, 2021? Do you know?
I don't.
Okay, it was 7,500. Do you know how many were in its legal team during that time period?
I don't. I'm sorry.
And do you know how many were in its public policy team?
I don't.
Mr. Schellenberger, do you know how many were employed in content moderation during that time?
I do not know.
Okay. So we're looking at thousands of employees overall and hundreds in offices were the focus of emails and documents you released. I will ask you, Mr. Schellenberger, how many emails did Mr. Musk give you access to?
I mean, we went through thousands of emails.
Did he give you access to all of the emails for the time period in which?
Yeah, I never had a single request denied. And not only that, but the amount of files that we were given were so voluminous that there was no way that anybody could have gone through them beforehand. And we never found an instance where there was any evidence that anything had been taken out.
Okay, so you would believe that you have probably millions of emails and documents, right? That's correct, would you say?
Millions.
No, I think the number's
sounds
less than
too
that.
high.
Okay, 100,000?
That's probably closer.
Probably, yeah.
Probably close to 100,000 that both of you are saying. Yet in the Twitter files, Mr. Taibbi, you've produced only 338 of those 100,000 emails. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And then who gave you access to these emails? Who was the
people at Twitter.
individual that gave you permission to access the emails?
Well, the attribution from my story is sources at Twitter, and that's what I'm going to refer to.
Okay. Did Mr. Musk contact you, Mr. Taibbi?
Again, the attribution from my story is sources at Twitter.
Mr. Schellenberger, did Mr. Musk contact you?
Actually, no. I was brought in by my friend Barry Weiss, and so this story, there's been a lot of misinformation
So Mr. Weiss
or
brought you in.
disinformation about
Mr.
that.
Taibbi, Ms. Weiss, thank you. Mr. Taibbi, have you had conversations with Elon Musk?
I have.
Okay. Mr. Taibbi, did Mr. Musk place any conditions on the use of the
Would the
email?
gentlelady yield for a second?
As long as my time is not used for
Are
it.
you trying to get journalists
No,
to
I'm not
expose
trying to
their
get, no,
sources?
I'm not.
Well, it
I am
sure sounds
asking,
like it.
no, well, if you will let me finish, and you had conversations with him, you said you weren't going to agree to who your sources were. I'm not asking you your source, I'm asking you if you had conversations with the owner of Twitter. And did Mr. Musk place any conditions on your use of the emails or documents?
No, in fact, I was told explicitly that we were given license to look at present-day Twitter as well as past Twitter.
So you had unfiltered access to Twitter's internal communications and systems?
Yes.
Would those include HR files?
No. We did not have access to personal information of any kind. In fact, we signed a waiver
Have you produced that waiver to the members of anyone on this committee or any staff?
I'd be happy to
Have
produce
you?
it. I haven't, but I'd be happy.
Have you given all of the access to what you were given by your source to this committee?
No, and I would never do that.
Okay. I didn't ask if you were given the committee, the individuals, but all of the files? No, you have not?
No.
So what we're getting is your dissemination, your decision as to what was important and not important in that, correct?
Which is true in every news
Is
story.
in every story. But you have files that you say you are sharing, but those files are just a smaller period of the files. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes?
there's-
Okay, thank you. And the FTC investigation of Twitter, you knew that they were investigating Twitter before the time period that Mr. Musk came on?
I was aware of it, yes.
And the FTC was concerned with user data being hacked or used? Is that correct, that they didn't have enough checks and balances on that data?
Well, I wasn't privy to that part.
Have you seen the consent decree?
No, I have not.
Okay, well, the consent decree is concerned with user data, which would be probably the reason that they were concerned if they're giving files to journalists that potentially data about users as well as data about individuals and employees would be given to them.
My understanding
So
is
I
that
didn't
they
ask
didn't
a
ask-
question. I didn't ask you a question, sir. Okay? So do you know that Elon Musk paid $44 billion for Twitter? Is that correct, Mrs. Schellenberger? Were you aware of that?
Yes, I read that.
And did you know that he received that part of the funding from Saudi Arabia as well as Qatar?
I heard that.
And did you know that one of those individuals who owns Binance was the company Binance, while he has Canadian citizenship, he is a Chinese national. Were you aware of that?
I did not know that.
Okay, and that he stated that that was for the cause. But thank you very much for answering my questions. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming for 5 minutes. Will the gentlelady yield for 20 seconds?
Yes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I just think this is interesting. First, the FTC is asking for your background, and now the ranking member of the Committee on the Weaponization of Government is asking for your sources. If
I
that
never
doesn't
asked them
raise-
for their sources.
Yes, you
I
did,
did
and
not
we-
ask for sources.
You know what?
I asked
The
if they were
gentlelady is not-
talking
the
to
gentlelady
Elon
is
Musk.
not
And they
recognized.
said that they were not talking. Well, you are not going to say
I will
I've
yield back
asked for
to, I
sources.
will yield back to the
Thank
gentlelady.
you.
I thank her for
With
yielding.
respect, you asked me who gave me
I
the
asked you who
files.
gave it to you, and once you said they were your sources, I then asked you if you had spoken with Elon Musk. I did not ask you who those sources were.
The
For
gentlelady
the
from
record. Keep the
Wyoming is
record correct.
recognized, and she will receive an additional 20.
Thôi anh hãy đi về vĩnh biệt kể từ đây. Còn luyến lưu làm chi, còn vấn vương làm gì? Ai thật lòng yêu ai đến bây giờ mình đã biết. Chuyện tình đôi ta anh hãy xem là huyền thoại. Anh đừng giận em, kìa dĩ vãng mùa thương vẫn đẹp như giấc mơ. Trên trời bao ánh sao tình ta bấy nhiêu kỷ niệm. Nào ngờ hôm nay định mệnh chia rẽ đôi ta, em biết làm sao hơn. Mùi tóc lan môi và thư tình em xin gửi lại anh. Với tất cả cuộc vui em cũng xin trả lại anh. Dù mãi em theo chồng, đời đời em vẫn nhớ mãi mối tình đầu tiên. Thôi anh hãy đi về, khóc chỉ làm buồn thêm. Trời đã khuya từ lâu, càng vắng đêm tà tư. Mai này thuyền hoa vui đón em về cùng bên khác. Đường tình đôi ta hai hướng đi buồn thật buồn. Anh hiểu dùm em, nào ước muốn giàu sang bởi tình duyên trái ngang. Em vì chữ hiếu nên đành câm nín cho đẹp lòng. Chuyện tình đôi ta chữ hiếu nên đành cầm nín cho đẹp lòng. Chuyện tình đôi ta nghẹn ngào trong đắng muôn cay, thôi vĩnh biệt thì